while it's pretty clear to me that Professor Garber's talk this morning was an independent and objective view of healthcare reform, it's pretty clear from listening to him that he views the world from a particular approach. So in order to be balanced, we thought we'd have somebody give an independent and objective talk that might view the world from the other side of the table, so to speak. And we were fortunate enough to have somebody that is well qualified to do that. His name was mentioned actually by Professor Garber and others earlier this morning. And it's with great pleasure that I'd like to introduce Professor Thomas Philipson, who's the Daniel Levin Professor of Public Policy Studies at the University of Chicago. And he also has DC connections. He was the senior healthcare advisor to Senator McCain during his presidential campaign. Hasn't written a book yet about it, but I'm sure has interesting comments. And also, somewhat uniquely, spent some time as a senior economic advisor to the FDA commissioner during the Bush administration. And that in and of itself is an interesting perspective on this issue. However, this afternoon we're going to hear about the economic implications of comparative effectiveness research, and I know that all of you are somewhat familiar with Washington, and you've probably noticed the acronym CE, and sometimes that means cost effective, and sometimes it means comparative effectiveness. The politically correct acronym is CER for Comparative Effectiveness Research, and as I'm sure you're going to hear from Peter Newman, CEA for Cost Effectiveness Analysis. But regardless of which acronym you use, I'm sure that the economic implications of CER will be of interest to us all. And without further ado then, Professor Thomas Philipson.
Thanks for having me. I'm going to talk a little bit about research we've done coming out soon as NBR working paper, but also past NBR working papers we've done explicitly on CER, and how some of that research relates, I think, to the device industry quite closely. This is probably not the audience that needs a lot of warm-up, but we have CER being prominent in the discussion since the ARRA. What has been less discussed, which economists are getting into a little bit, I think, is essentially how this is going to work if it actually concerns having public subsidies for quality information on medical products. And I'll talk quite extensively about exactly those kind of links between generating more evidence and what impact it may have on healthcare markets generally. So what is CER again? Probably a review. It could be anything. It could be anything from randomized clinical trials. It could be observational studies. It could be synthesis or meta-analysis. For the purpose I'm going to be talking about today, that's not really going to matter as long as what you actually conclude turns out to be moving towards the truth. I'll talk more precisely about what we mean by that. But there's sort of a long history, both in the U.S. and more implemented abroad, I would say, of having public technology assessment taking place, or discussed in the U.S. more than taking place. So what I want to talk about first is sort of a bigger view of it, and then I'm going to zone in almost too much on sort of a micro issues that arises in doing CR. But in general, I want to talk about public versus private technology assessments and how that might differ for devices or medical products generally versus procedures. So the current initiative, as was alluded to earlier on, which I think is often missing in the debate, is essentially a public initiative as opposed to a private initiative, which presumably private industry has great stake in providing quality information about their products. So therefore, I think what has been less thought about, and I think is important, is where does public money work the best compared to private spending in this area? And there's sort of a major division here, I think, between medical products and procedures. Medical products have intellectual property many times, at least initially. And therefore, there's great incentives for those in the private sector who actually own these products to provide, quality information. It might be biased, obviously, by competitors, so certainly the first to point out if it is biased. But there's strong incentives to generate quality information in the private sector. That's not true for procedures, which are not owned. No one owns procedures. So there's no one who has the same kind of stake in investing in better evidence for procedures. So I think in terms of public versus private, I think there's a great role for public subsidies, not to be focused on medical products, but to be focused on medical procedures. Another difference between products and procedures is that products have mandated effectiveness studies through the FDA. And procedures many times don't have that same level of evidence generated by mandates. So many times, comparative effectiveness, if you take effectiveness studies being mandated by FDA and you have a placebo study on treatment A and a placebo study on treatment B, it's not that hard to figure out whether A versus B is better, and that's what comparative effectiveness is about. So I think those two distinctions is important for this industry, the device industry, arguing away from being a target of CER, because the private incentives are much stronger for people who own things. And also, it's not mandated on many other parts of the healthcare spending where we don't have as good effectiveness evidence as a basis for going on the market.